This is Comcast Local Edition. I'm Jack Hansen. We are on the USS Hornet. We are anchored permanently on Alameda. It's a floating museum, someplace that you can visit, but this week they're celebrating the 35th anniversary of the picking up of the Apollo 11 astronauts. With me right now is a gentleman who was involved in the Apollo 10 program and the Apollo 13 program. Captain Charles B. Smiley, USN, now retired. That's the formal official title.
That's correct.
Nice to see you, Chuck. Great to have you
Thank
here.
you. Nice to be here.
You having a good time this week?
I'm having a glorious time.
Meeting people you worked with during all that time?
Yes, it is. It's a grand reunion.
Yeah. You were a helicopter pilot,
Yes.
Apollo 10. Give us back, let's go back a little bit, okay? You were a reconnaissance pilot and fixed-wing aircraft originally for the Naval Air Corps, right?
That's correct. That's
okay. What happened to get you into helicopters?
I met a guy. I went back to college. The Navy sent me back to college. There was an Air Force officer there who was also coming back to college to finish his degree. And he said, "Have you ever thought about helicopters?" And it changed my life.
Because it was such a thrill, such a challenging, or tell us about the difference.
Absolutely. Helicopter flying is just different. It's very demanding. And anything that you do to any single control on a helicopter affects every other control on the helicopter. So we don't smoke a lot of cigarettes while we're flying. We just sort of concentrate on flying the helicopter.
Just flying. Yeah. This helicopter behind us, was this the kind that you started with, or what model was this that related to what you were doing?
This is a tandem helicopter.
Right.
It has two rotors.
Right.
All my experience was in single lifting rotor helicopters,
okay.
Mainly Sikorsky's.
Okay. When you got the assignment to go after Apollo 10, tell me about your reaction to that and what happened.
Well, obviously, it's almost impossible to describe. To be told that you're going to be involved in what is perhaps mankind's greatest adventure, and I'm just an old guy from Oklahoma who flies helicopters, and now I'm going to be sent out to pick up these guys that have just come back from the moon. So,
right.
Yeah, pretty overpowering.
Yeah. And did the impact of that really set in? Or were you so programmed and so trained that going through the motion, I've heard this over and over again, that you were so well trained that you did your job, and later on, the emotion sort of came out.
That's absolutely true. However, I had one very fortunate circumstance in that I did the recovery on Apollo 13. Because of, as you know, it was rather ill-fated, and the problems that took place, they didn't land on the moon, which meant that when we brought them back, we didn't have to put them in quarantine. So we kept them overnight. The next day, we flew them into Pango Pango, and we put one astronaut in each of 3 helicopters, and I had Jim Lovell with me. Accordingly, I found myself sitting in a cockpit, because he was in the co-pilot seat and the co-pilot was in the back, sitting in a cockpit with a very articulate man who had just come back from the moon yesterday. But you see, it's different with pilots. When you put pilots in a cockpit, it's just 2 guys in the cockpit. So we had about an hour-long conversation, which I'll never forget as long as I live.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that's one of the things I thought about. And what did you do yesterday? Well, I was on the moon, today I'm back, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know.
It doesn't quite go like that. All sorts of questions. He was very generous, because I tried to restrain myself from just bombarding him with questions. But I recognized that this was the last chance he was going to have to just relax. He'd be lionized as soon as he got out of that helicopter for the oncoming months. At that point in time, he was probably the best known man on the face of the earth, because he was a captain of Apollo 13.
Yeah.
So I tried to be as restrained as I could, but I asked him the questions that probably not as good as those you would have asked him, but I asked him what most impressed him. Was it the side of the moon that no one had ever seen?
Right.
No, that wasn't it. Of course, it was the Earth. Why the Earth? Well, because it's all out there against this black curtain, and it's in color.
Yeah, in color.
And the things that we normally see in the sky are not.
Yeah.
So you suddenly see this beautiful, as he said, big Christmas tree ornament hanging out there, and it's blue with a little white frosting on it. And as I remember, I asked him if he was going to describe it in one word, what it might be, and he said, fragile.
That's great. Thanks for being our guest.
You bet.
I appreciate it very much. That's Comcast Local Edition on the USS Hornet. Thanks for watching. This is Comcast Local Edition. I'm Jack Hansen aboard the USS Hornet. We are anchored in Alameda. You can visit. It's a floating museum. This week they're celebrating the pickup of the Apollo astronauts. Apollo 11, it's a fantastic week. Everyone's having a great time. Lots of buddies getting together who haven't seen each other in years. One of those is Captain Charles B. Smiley, USN retired. Nice to have you here, Chuck.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You were involved in the pickup of 10 and 13. Tell us about 13, because that was a policy change from NASA, not worried about bringing back, as they say, moon germs, right? So you had a chance to talk to the astronauts. Sort of run us through that, the sequence of events in that.
It came about essentially because of the problem they had with the command service module a couple of days into the mission when they said those famous words, "Houston, we have a problem." And they did. And at first blush, it appeared we might be out of a job as a recovery force because we didn't know if we'd have them come back in order to recover them.
I have to interrupt you once. I want to mention you were the helicopter pilot.
Yes.
And that was the rest of the pickup team, right?
Yes. Yes. So because of the problem, they weren't able to effect a landing on the lunar surface. So they were not, by definition, possibly infected with any of these microbes. And so when they came back, it was not necessary to put them in the mobile quarantine facility. Instead, they spent the night on board. We had a nice dinner. They took a physical. And the next morning, we put the 3 astronauts in one each in 3 helicopters and flew them into Pago Pago, American Samoa. What this did was to give those of us fortunate enough to be one of the pilots an opportunity to spend about an hour all alone in a cockpit with a man who just came back from the moon yesterday. And it was quite an experience.
Great experience. When they all sat down to have dinner that first night, were you involved in that dinner too? What was the conversation like? Here are 3 guys who came back from going around the moon, and pilot had picked them up, a co-pilot, I assume, flight surgeon was on the
flight surgeon was with us, yes.
All were having dinner. Just a bunch of guys sitting around, right?
Well, of course, what they did was they shared us. They shared the astronauts with every officer in the wardroom. So they were up on a dais, and we were there, of course, and everyone, the 3 astronauts, as it's popular to say today, were sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Every eye was on them. There was no conversation at the tables. Right. We only were interested in what they had to say and what they were doing and everything to do with them. These were possibly the 3 best-known people in the world at that particular time.
First time in, the first few people who've ever left this earth like that and come back safely. But when they were up there, did they have conversation among themselves, or were they just sort of directing their conversation toward the people who were interested in what they had done?
They were kind enough to share a lot of things with them while it was fresh in their mind, and all these things were vivid to them at that point in time. So it was a very rich experience for all of us, and they were each asked to say a few words individually, and of course we hung on every word that they had to say.
Yeah.
We had done recoveries before, but 13 was special because we really didn't know whether we were going to see these guys again or not.
Right. The problems that happened, refresh us again on the problems they were having. I do remember they had problems.
Yes. Well, what happened was that they began to do what's called a cryo stir. They were going to stir up the liquid oxygen tanks, and when they did, there was a spark, which created an explosion, which lost a lot of their electrical power and quite a few of their life essential equipment. So the thing that saved them was the Yankee ingenuity that was exhibited when in Houston they knew everything they had in the command module, and they said, with no more equipment than they have up there, we want you to recreate what they would have had if the explosion hadn't taken place.
Yeah. It's a fantastic story. You were involved in it. Congratulations. Great seeing you, Chuck. Thanks for being our guest. It's Comcast Local Edition. I'm Jack Hansen on USS Hornet. Thank you for watching.